This is Management Information Systems, Chapter 14, looking into risks, security, and disaster recovery. The development, implementation, and maintenance of information systems constitutes a large and growing cost of doing business. Protecting these resources is a primary concern for all organizations, and it should also be a concern for all individuals. The increasing reliance on information systems, as well as the world's reliance on the connection to the outside world through the public network or the internet, means that securing our information systems is increasingly challenging. Adding to this challenge is also the increased tendency to store data on portable devices, which means companies could have security information that is going out of their facility on employees' phones or other portable devices, and potential for that being lost or stolen is very great. The role of computer controls and security is to protect the systems against both accidental mishaps and intentional theft or corruption of data. We also have to make sure that our organizations are complying with laws and the expectations of both employees and customers as far as their privacy rights are concerned. Some of the major goals of information security are to reduce the risk of systems and organizations ceasing operations, maintaining information confidentiality, ensuring the integrity and reliability of data resources, ensuring the uninterrupted availability of the data resources and online operations of the organization, and ensuring compliance with policies and laws regarding security and privacy, as well as any other laws that may pertain to the industry that the company is in. So in order to properly protect against potential problems with your hardware and software, you need to understand what those risks are. And then we must execute security measures that will defend against those risks. For example, when I used to teach computer-based accounting, we would talk about how could someone commit a fraud in a company. What were the things they could do that would allow them to commit a fraud? And I had a student one time ask me, why are you teaching us to be criminals? And my response was, I'm not teaching you to be a criminal, but if you cannot determine how someone is going to steal from you, then how can you prevent it? And that goes for individuals as well. If we could not anticipate that someone could break into your home through a door or a window, then we would not know to lock those. So we anticipate the ways in which we are at risk, and then we implement measures to protect us against those. So in recent years, Congress has passed several laws that set standards for the protection of different entities' privacy rights. There is Health Insurance Portability Act, or HIPAA, which protects us against patient rights and sharing our medical information. There's FERPA, F-E-R-P-A, the Family Education Rights Privacy Act, which protects student rights when it comes to sharing your information. Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 gives businesses guidelines for the security measures they need to have in place on their to protect their employees' and customers' information. Other companies have similar laws to protect the information security and privacy rights of their residents. So the corporate concern should not only focus on complying with the law, but also has to ensure that our information resources are secure. One of the foundational concepts associated with information security is known as the Cia Triad. And it is defined as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So we need to ensure that we are maintaining confidentiality, we are preventing the disclosure of information to unauthorized entities, we must ensure integrity. And that means we are ensuring the accuracy and consistency of the data. The data should not be modified or deleted without authorization or detection. And then finally, we need to maintain availability. So the data needs to be accessible to authorized parties and entities and systems when it's needed and in an appropriate time frame. Information is the lifeblood of any modern organization. Practically every aspect of our businesses depend on the currency of the processed data and the timely provisions of information. Because of this, it is even more critical for us to be protecting our information systems against threats. As a professional, you must be aware of what might happen to the information system, and you must protect those systems against events that threaten their operation and make it impossible to carry out critical business activities. I also think that as individuals, we need to be aware of how much we rely on technology. We all are storing more and more information on our devices, computers, phones, and the such. We need to make sure we are protecting those resources so we don't lose things that are valuable or important to us. So this chapter, I think, can apply to you both as a potential business person, but also as an individual trying to protect their own information resources. I attended a conference that was on information security. It was for CPAs, and the speaker was Teresa Grafenstein, and she is the inspector, or was at that time, the Inspector General for the U.S. House of Representatives, which meant she's kind of like the internal auditor for the House of Representatives. And she was in charge of information security. She stated that over 90% of the system failures that we see happen can directly be linked to human error. Her quote was that we open the door and let the criminals into our systems. She cited examples of how we do that, and she said we are the weakest link, the people using the systems within all security systems. and partially because we do things that we know we're not supposed to. So she said she was going to test how security systems were working in the House of Representatives. So she sent out an email stating that they would be testing employees' adherence to the policy that they were not to click on any links in emails that they received. So the first email they sent out was a fake email saying if you click here, you could win $1 million or whatever. And of course, no one clicked on it. They all deleted it. And then they sent one out, saying that, something similar where it was, your bank account has been hacked or has a problem and we need you to click here and confirm all of your information. And again, no one clicked on it. Then the last email that went out basically said that the House of Representatives had decided to start a new tradition similar to the tradition at the White House that happens around the time of Thanksgiving. They were going to be having a pardoning of the turkey ceremony, kind of like the president does at the White House every year. And the problem was that they decided to do this a little too late so that there were limited seats available at the initial or inaugural event. They said it would be an annual event after this, but for this first one, there was a limited number of seats available, and they cited how many seats there were. And it was enough for about half of the House of Representatives to be present. The email went on to say that since the seats were limited, they would fill them on a first-come, first-served basis, and to click on the link below to get your representative signed up for one of the seats. They were hoping that the sense of urgency that got created by the fact that it was limited seats and the fact that the House of Representatives individuals would want to see, make sure that their person got the publicity of being there because they figured the press would be there as well. So many of the staff members clicked on the link to try to get their representative signed up. When they clicked on the link, they, of course, received a message on the screen that said, oops, you aren't supposed to click on links, to let the individual know that they had made an error in judgment. Now, someone in the class raised their hand and said, how would I know that that was fake? How would I know that there wasn't that urgency and that I shouldn't do it? And her response was, if we were planning a big event, don't you think you would have heard someone talking about it? And of course, no one had been talking about it because no one was planning it. She said in the break room or in the bathroom or, as you're talking around the office, don't you think you would have heard someone say, have you heard about this new event we're planning? No one had made those comments. They also said that the individual that was listed that you were to contact did not work there at the House of Representatives. So if they had checked, they would have found that that employee, quote, employee, did not exist. She said, however, even if the employee did exist, could you not pick up the phone and call that person and say, hey, is this real? I'd like to get my representative set up if at all possible. And by calling on the phone, you avoid the risk that the link might download malware onto your system. So she said there are ways that you can check on these things, but if the rules say you are never to click on links, and you do, you become the way that someone can get into your system. These are some of the concerns we have in trying to protect our information systems. Obviously, computer crimes can occur. We can have hardware that is lost, stolen, or damaged. We can have information privacy issues, and system failure is, of course, also a concern. So one of the biggest risks we have as companies right now is downtime, the period of time when the information system is not available. You know, if the system goes down for 5 or 10 minutes, that's fine. You take a break, you go to the restroom, whatever. But if the system goes down for days or hours, now people are not productive and they cannot do their jobs. They cannot get the answers they need. If I'm in a company and someone calls in and says, do you have inventory in stock? I would like to order something from you. If the system is down and you can't look it up, you may have to go out to the warehouse to ask. Well, perhaps the warehouse is not in the same area you are in. Now you are forced to either put that person on hold or say you will call them back, because now you have to contact the warehouse to find out what's going on. So it makes everything in work come to a stop. I can remember being at clients when their system would go down, and we would usually contact someone in IT and say, how long is this system going to be down? Because I don't want to sit here billing you if it's not going to come back up today. If it was a situation where we knew we were bringing it down, it was only going to take a few minutes to install something, and then we're going to bring it back up in 20 minutes, okay, fine, and we'll go take a lunch break. But downtime costs the U.S. billions of dollars annually in people being non-productive. We also see risks associated with cloud computing and cloud storage. If I cannot access the information that I have stored on the cloud, or that I'm trying to use software that's stored on the cloud, then I cannot complete the tasks that I need to do. For example, Amazon, in their earnings report in 2013, estimated that 1 hour of downtime for their organization, downtime of their website, was estimated to cost them about $5 million. So you can see that is a staggering amount for every hour they lose. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, sometimes sabotage efforts, such as denial of service attacks, can cause them to be down for multiple hours. So you can imagine being down for an entire day at $5 million an hour. Obviously, the cost of a company being down are averages. They depend on the industry and the size of the company, as well as other factors. The number one cause of downtime is hardware failure. There are a lot of things that can cause hardware to fail. Some things that are kind of out of our control are natural disasters. Fires, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, lightning, even animal and human errors. Several years ago, my house was struck by lightning. It destroyed every electronic device in the home that was plugged in. The garage door openers would not open, would not work. The refrigerator would not work. The televisions were destroyed. The treadmill. We have a pool cover that is electric, could not open it. The pool pump stopped working. Everything failed. However, we had all of the computers and printers plugged into power strips. Surge protecting power strips. Every computer was still functioning. Every printer that was plugged into those devices was still functioning. The power strips all had to be replaced, but they protected the devices from a lightning strike that directly hit our home. This is a simple control anyone could be using, are these surge protectors. And all computers should be plugged into these. Now at our home, the TVs, the VCRs, the DVRs, the anything that can be plugged into a surge protecting power strip is. There are some, obviously, devices that they recommend go directly into the wall and not into those. And so those are still plugged in that same way. We've also, at our home, had a couple of instances where animals have chewed through electrical wires in the yard that were buried. Twice we've had our well, the wires going out to the well that pumps the water into our house be chewed through and destroyed, and we had to have the electrician come out and replace those. So animals gnawing through cables, construction workers have accidentally cut through cables in the past, doing work around the yard, perhaps the cable connection, which controlled our internet, or electrical wiring as well. So these are all things that we have to protect against, but it doesn't necessarily mean we can control preventing them. One good way to protect against a lot of these issues are maintaining uninterruptible power supplies, as well as surge protecting power strips to plug into. These also protect against a blackout or a brownout. So a blackout is when we have a complete loss of power, and a brownout is when we have a partial loss of electricity. So these partial or complete losses of electricity cause power failures within the computers. If the computer shuts down improperly, not only can it damage the hardware itself, but it can also damage or cause you to lose the data that is stored on that computer. So it's very important that you're protecting against these. An uninterruptible power supply is a backup supply of power that's battery operated usually, and it will provide enough power to your computers to let you properly shut them down when the power goes out. So it'll keep them running in a brownout where it's just a partial loss, but it will also keep them up long enough for us to properly shut them down to prevent any damage. Another item that we have at our house, because my husband and I both work from home, prolonged power outages are a significant concern because we would not be able to do our work. So we also have a generator that automatically turns on for us if the power is out for a period of time. So that would allow us to continue to work and keep certain things in our home functional, such as refrigerators or freezers. In order to protect against vandalism or the deliberate destruction of your equipment, you do need to try to secure that in a locked room or a locked area where someone cannot access it that shouldn't. These rooms are usually equipped in a way to try to protect also against natural disasters for these items by doing things such as having a fire suppression system in place, having air conditioning in these rooms so that the computers do not overheat. They also sometimes are built on raised floors to keep all the electrical components up off the floor in case of a flood in that area. They would not get the water on them. So there's a lot of things like that that you can do in a special room if your computer needs that. So when you're trying to figure out what you should be spending your most money protecting, data is your primary concern. Data is the unique resource that your company has gathered, and it is the most costly to recreate if you lose it. And sometimes you cannot recreate it. Excuse me. Data collected over time can almost never be recollected the same way. And even if you can, it is often very time-consuming and expensive. Trying to recreate data that you lost can be a very costly experience. I had a client that had a lightning strike to their computer, which destroyed the hard drive. They also had a failure in their backup security system. So when we were able to try to reinstall the accounting software and get things back up and running, we ended up losing about 3 months worth of data. Remember, this is a small business because I do not work with extremely large companies. So you're talking about a company that has less than 50 employees. So relatively small manufacturing company, and the cost to recreate that data was close to $20,000 by the time they were able to recreate 3 months worth of accounting data. Your applications are second in concern because most of those are either stored on disks or devices that you put in a secure place to reinstall from, or you could simply download another copy from the vendor that you purchased it from. So software is oftentimes easier to reinstall. Data, on the other hand, is very much your biggest concern. Some of your risks to data are that someone could change it or destroy it. And it may not even be that it was done intentionally. As I told you a minute ago, my client had a lightning strike that hit their computer and destroyed the hard drive, causing them to lose that data. So sometimes it is intentional, and other times it is simply accidents or acts of nature that can cause problems with your data. So these are some of the terms. The red colored terms are keywords on your keyword list. The rest are risks that you have in an in a computer information system. So many of these are things that we need to be aware of and watch out for. One thing that you might want to consider is, if you are interested in this topic, every one of these buttons on this PowerPoint slide is a link to additional information about these security and information technology issues. So as an example, I worked at a client, and this particular client had a network technician that they had previously been employing. Now, when they did a cutback, they cut this person's position within the organization, but they also offered him the ability to work as a subcontractor to come out on an as-needed basis and work with them on their technology, keeping the network up and running and those things. This particular client had their network would go down, causing downtime probably 2 or 3, 4 times a month. Now, I had other clients at the same time using the same type of network operating system, the same types of hardware, and their systems would go down maybe once a year, if that. So I kept telling this client, something is not right. Perhaps your individual set something up incorrectly or doesn't know all of the nuances of this particular network operating system. But I kept telling them, I do not have anyone else experiencing all these problems. Well, after a while, this individual got a little more daring with what they were doing and decided to take a corporate credit card out of the controller's desk when he was there helping her with a technology issue on her computer. A few days later, the company got a call from a computer store asking if this individual was authorized to purchase 10 or 12 laptops. And when they said he was not authorized to purchase 10 or 12 laptops or any laptops, the store went out and told him they had to keep the credit card because the bank declined the charge. And the bank instructed them they had to keep the card and cut it up. Well, he figured he had been caught, so he disappeared at that point. They contacted me and asked me to come in and try to help them fix the problems. Because we had found out that by this time we were able to uncover that this individual had intentionally gone into the accounting software and changed a lot of transactions, a lot of the setup of the system to have it post incorrectly and do incorrect things to try to cover up his trail for the things he was doing and the money he was stealing. So finally I said to this company, you need to have someone come in and check your server. Now mind you, they had changed the locks to the computer room door. They had changed the locks to the company offices. And all in an effort to keep this man out. And when they had the company come in to check the server and see if it was set up correctly, what they found was this person had created several, they call them backdoors, ways that he could get into that server remotely and not be detected. It would not leave a record that he was there, and it would not show up for anyone else to see that he had been in there. They also found several logic bomb programs that were written to cause the system to crash, to erase programs so that he would have to reinstall them, and to even damage data files so that he would have to restore backups. They said they had found somewhere around 15 backdoors and at least a dozen logic bomb programs that were hidden on this server, and they could not guarantee that they had identified all of them. So their advice to this company was to completely disconnect the server and purchase a new device and start the server from scratch so that they were sure this individual would not have the back doors into their system. You see, the company had changed the locks to the building and the locks to the computer room and the locks to the accounting offices and thought they were safe. They thought he could not get into their company anymore. But what we learned was through these back doors and information technology risks, he was able to get into their computer system, thereby getting into their company, and still was able to crash their network or cause problems. What they figure he was doing over the time that he worked with them was when he needed extra money, he would go in through a back door, trigger a logic bomb, it would crash their server, and then they would call him in to repair the damage that had been done. So these things are real risks that we need to be aware of. One of the biggest risks that we are concerned about, or should be concerned about, are keystroke logging or key logging software products, because these record every keystroke we make on our computer. The users do not normally know that they're being recorded, and all of the information that is being recorded is being stored on someone else's server or phone, device. So they're usually using these to collect usernames and passwords. They can then use that information to hack into bank accounts or other sensitive information sites and get more information. They can also sell these passwords and credit card numbers and all of these things that they can gather and sell them on the black market to make money, even if they don't directly use them themselves. This is also a significant concern when it comes to our smartphones. As we start doing more and more things on our smartphone, there's a lot of concern that if we get a keystroke logging program on our smartphone, that much of our sensitive data would be at risk. Social engineering is a case where con artists pretend to be someone and they ask for passwords. So they may come in and say that they are the network support person and they need your password so that they can log in and fix some problems that they're having. This is another area where we as users become the weakest link, because the con artists trick the users into giving out the passwords. They may do it over the phone or in person. Oftentimes it's over the phone. They telephone in and tell you that they need the password to an application or a database because they're there to fix a problem that you're having with it. They may even cite the name of a company that you utilize for support, and perhaps they have that company named simply by watching the trucks that show up in your driveway as far as your company. So this is becoming another big issue, and they call this social engineering. They use this so they can get into your systems and steal valuable information. Identity theft is another issue that is concerning to people. They steal information about a person's identity, such as their social security number, driver's license number, credit card numbers, and so forth. And then they can pretend to be that person. They can try to withdraw your money from your bank accounts, put charges on credit cards, apply for new credit cards, and oftentimes they apply for new loans and then default on those, leaving a mess for the individual to try to clean up. Identity theft can cost an individual millions of hours and dollars. Companies as well. Stealing the identity of a company is now becoming a big issue, as well as stealing the identity of an individual. Another area as an individual that you should be aware of, especially if you are a parent or when you become a parent. Stealing the identity of children is one of the biggest things that they're going after right now. They try to steal the identity of someone under the age of 18 because they know no one will be checking their credit for a lengthy period of time. And so it gives them a long time to take out loans, default on them, etc. There was a story on the news a year ago or so about an individual who had just turned 18, applied for a student loan and was denied. And when asked why she was denied, they told her she had defaulted on a home several years prior in a different state. Someone had stolen her identity and then got a mortgage and defaulted on that mortgage. In order to get the mess cleaned up, she was not going to be able to start college for at least a year, if not longer, because they had to get this information fixed on her record prior to being able to get a loan. Phishing and spearfishing are two ways that we try to get information for identity theft. So with phishing, you're getting an email, for example, and they ask you to click on a link because maybe there's a problem with your account. So I will tell you, in the past week, I have gotten emails from, quote, Wells Fargo that my account has problems and they need me to click a link so that I can give them the information they need to do a security check. Well, number one, I don't even have an account with Wells Fargo. So you know those are bogus. I've also had my Discover card frozen, which again, I don't have a Discover card. So these emails and messages are becoming more frequent, and sometimes they look very realistic. I got one that said my Chase account was having a problem. I do have a Chase account, but rather than click on their link, what I did was I went into the bank account the normal way that I would go in. If there had really legitimately been a problem, when I logged in my normal way, I would have seen a message or received a message. Since I did not, I knew it was a phishing expedition and I ignored it. You can also sometimes hover over the link or hover over the return email address to see that those are not really going to be returned to where you would think they would be. The return link did not take you to a Chase website, and the return email went to some Roadrunner account in another state. So speared phishing, they use personal information and they try to get access into organizational systems. Okay, so I may get an email as the secretary in an organization requesting that I click on a link to address an issue for my supervisor. When I was in a class for CPE, they were talking about that these are not only coming in through emails now, but they are also coming in through text messages. And one person admitted that they had received a text message instructing them to wire a certain amount of money to their boss at a certain account so that he could, or to a vendor or something at a different account so that the boss could facilitate this business transaction. It came in when the boss was not in the office, and apparently this person said prior to this it had been the boss's common practice to text him instructions of things to do. So he transferred the large amount of money into this other account, and shortly after that learned that the text messages did not come from his boss, and when they tried to get the money back, it was too late. They couldn't. It was a large amount of money that could have crippled many companies. And now this person shared that they no longer have a policy that they can accept text messages or any other type of communication other than a phone call where they actually hear the person and know they are talking to the right individual to transfer any financial funds. Because these are becoming issues where we're using phones as well as emails. Cyber terrorism involves a terrorist attack. A few years ago, we heard about several terrorist groups hijacking school websites and posting information on them, or threats to scare individuals in our country. So one thing to be aware about with phishing is we are seeing a little bit of a change in the trends of some of the phishing attacks. In a 2013 research report, they said almost 40% of the phishing was attacking through social media sites. Another 17% was attacking through search engine sites, and only 13% were going through banks and other pay organizations. So it's no longer the this higher volume being with the banks. Now we're seeing a lot of them that say, you need to log into Facebook for a certain thing, or you need to log into some other social media. In the past 5 years, there's been a dramatic shift from using the banks and financial institutions to using more social media networking sites. And there is speculation that it's because they realize that people are easier to con than the bank's online security systems are. So, be conscious that it's not just coming from those banks anymore. That is a trend that is changing. Hacking is unauthorized access into your system. So if someone's getting into your computer and they're not authorized, that's considered hacking. There is a new term that we're starting to hear where they call it either white hat hacking or ethical hacking. So you want to realize when you hear that term, you're talking about they are still trying to break into your system in an unauthorized way, except now they're doing it because you've asked them to. So we can hire these white hat hackers or ethical hackers to break into systems and find the flaws that let them in so we can fix those flaws. So there's an entire industry that is currently popping up on this white hat hacking. And from the research I've seen, they can make a significant amount of money legally breaking into systems if they are skilled at that. So some of these other things that we have to be concerned about, a honey token is a technique that we can use where we put a bogus record in a networked database. We know that this record is something that neither employees nor business partners would ever access for a legitimate purpose. So it should just sit there and be left alone all the time. If an intruder breaks into our network or hacks in and copies that information somewhere else, the program would alert security personnel that that honey token had been accessed. That lets them know that someone who should not be in the network is in there, because otherwise it would never be accessed. A honeypot is another technique that we can use to try to capture these hackers. Basically, we set up a mirrored copy of a production database. The production database is the one that we are using to run our business, and the other one has invalid records in it. It's set up to make intruders think they have accessed the production database, and then it traces the things that they are doing, and it allows the user to educate their security officers as to what people would be looking for and how they were able to break in and what the vulnerable points are, so they can fix those in their live system. Viruses are programs that spread from computer to computer. A lot of times they will spread because they attach to a file, and then when we share that file, they will go into a new computer. Viruses are programs that are written to attack a specific operating system. So please be aware, many people have the false belief that Macintosh computers cannot get viruses. That is very much false. There are fewer viruses typically written to target the Mac OS. I believe that is because if my goal is to wreak havoc and cause problems, I am going to write a virus program that is going to go after the industry leader operating system. So more viruses are written to attack Windows computers. They are still written to attack the Mac. So you should be protecting that computer as well. The Mac operating system does have some antivirus protection built into it, but many experts now recommend that you add additional virus protection on your Mac as well as on your Windows machine. Now, a worm is another type of malware. Viruses are malware, so are worms, so are Trojan horses. A lot of times these three categories all get lumped into the term viruses. But a worm is different because it does not need anything to spread. So it will spread to other computers connected to the network without any human intervention. So I don't need to share a file. It'll just make its way through all of the computers that are attached to the network. Trojan horses are also sometimes called viruses, and they're given their name because of the destructive gift given to the ancient Trojans in Greek mythology. In the war against Troy, they pretended they were abandoning the city and hid in a wooden horse. When the Trojans pulled the wooden horse into the city, at night the soldiers were able to climb out of their hiding spots and then conquer the city. Trojan horses are oftentimes some of the hardest ones to get rid of. I remember I had a Trojan horse one time, and I had to eventually reformat the hard drive to get rid of it. Now, there is virus protection software called antivirus software that will help us protect against viruses. But you need to be aware that these need to be continually, regularly updated, or they are not effective, because every day new viruses and new malware is being identified. They're finding new patterns to indicate that something looks as though it could be malware. And if you're not updating your system, all of those new patterns are not being included in your version of that software. Many of these software programs give you capability to automatically update them. So if you turn that on, then anytime you're connected to the network, if there is an update, it would automatically be installed for you. If you do not use the automatic update process, you need to make sure that you are regularly updating that software. I was recommended one time that if you're not going to use their automated updates, you should be updating the software at least once a week, checking for updates to make sure there are not new issues coming out. Another thing that can help with the protection against viruses and other malware is to update your operating system with all security patches that are being introduced. Every time they discover these viruses and they figure out how they are breaking through our operating systems and what security holes they are targeting, the software manufacturers that wrote the operating systems are trying to find ways to close those holes and fix them. So if you get a security update and you do not install it, everyone else who has installed that security update has closed the hole that allowed that virus to infect computers. But your hole is still in existence and the virus can still get in and affect you. So those security updates are also another important tool that you can use to protect your systems. A logic bomb is software or a program that is created to cause damage at a specific time. So an example of this is I had a client that was installing an accounting system, and this was many years ago. And in order to save a record, such as an account number or a customer's information, you had to use the F10 key. Now, I'm not sure what else the F10 key is ever used for. I don't recall ever using it on my computers for anything else other than this one program. But we would get the software installed, we would get it up and running, and we would be all ready to enter our first transaction, our first account number into the general ledger. And as soon as they would add the first account number, they would hit that F10 key and it would literally erase everything on that computer. So after this happened, the first time we thought perhaps we did something wrong. The second time they thought there was a bug in the software that they had installed, the accounting software. And when they confirmed with that manufacturer that this was not happening anywhere else, we then had the computer checked and a logic bomb piece of malware was identified on their system that was causing this problem. And every time they would restore a backup to get their computer back to the way where they could start again, the backup reinstalled that logic bomb. So they again had to completely format the hard drive and start over from a clean drive with nothing on it. So anything that had been on that computer was lost. We can obviously also have unintentional, non-malicious damage. If we're not trained properly, we can lose information. If we do not adhere to backup procedures, we can lose information. I was at a client one time. The software manufacturer told us that we could try something to fix the problem they were having. They said there was a 50-50 chance that it would fix the problem, but the other 50% chance meant that it would destroy the data. So it was either going to fix it or ruin it. So they said, don't do this without a backup. Well, this particular client did not like doing backups. He felt they were a waste of time. And he had not done a backup for many, many months. So I told him we could not do this without a backup. So rather than bill him while the backup was running, I told him I would go to lunch and then I would come back and we could do it after lunch when the backup was completed. Unfortunately, he decided he wasn't going to do the backup anyways. So when I came back and he informed me that there was a backup, we did the process, it did not work, and all of his data was destroyed in his accounting software. When I asked for the backup so that we could reinstall the software, he informed me at that point that he had lied and hadn't really done one, and that his employees would just have to recreate the entire year's data from the reports that they had. And by the way, this happened in October in a calendar year company. So they had 10 months worth of data they had to recreate. A very costly task, both by not adhering to backup procedures and also by human error. So phishing is a method of stealing money over the phone. Typically, the scammer would call using a caller ID spoofing device to make it look like it was coming from a familiar number or a legitimate source. And they would be then directed by a recorded message to call a toll-free number. It's kind of similar to phishing. That's why the name is so familiar. I see these all the time lately. Home warranties. I've been told multiple times that my Social Security number was locked and they were going to be sending the sheriff to arrest me if I did not call a certain number to clear up a problem. There is a Truth in Caller ID Act that makes caller ID prohibits any person or entity from transmitting misleading or incorrect caller ID information with the intent to defraud or cause harm. So obviously there are exceptions on this as far as in the enforcement of law enforcement officials using it to catch criminals or things like that. But you can tell that this law has not been very effective in stopping this problem because I still get multiple calls every single day on my cell phone from scammed caller ID numbers that have been spoofed. So obviously this is still a significant issue. So again, hacking means using some or all of the resources without the consent of the owner. It could mean they just simply access your system and use the computer for something that you don't know it is being used for. They could be installing a small program on it called a bot, which allows them to then control your computer and use it to send out spam or to send messages toward a server in a denial of service attack. It could mean that they are getting into your system to try to steal your data, to change the way your website looks, or to create a botnet, which is a network of computers that you have control of through these bots. Now, we have a massive movement to try to address a lot of these issues, but there's still significant concerns. So again, here are some of the other terms that we just talked about. A lot of times these can be used to send spam. We've seen them also being used to send just simply messages toward a server so that they can complete a denial of service attack. A denial of service attack is when an attacker launches a large number of information requests toward one server. The intention is to create a high volume login request and slow down the legitimate traffic to the server's site. It slows the server to a halt, and then the server's frantic efforts to handle the massive amounts of traffic causes the site to shut down. A lot of times these denial of service attacks are utilizing computers that have bots installed on them, and the individual who owns the computer has no knowledge that this is taking place. Sometimes it is when it's multiple computers that they can control. They call this a distributed denial of service attack. So it's coming at them from multiple computers. The computers are with the bots on them are sometimes called zombies. And these zombies are controlled by this scammer who is having them send information. Sometimes these are now being utilized, not just computers, but also all of the smart devices in our homes. The smart refrigerators, the smart blinds, the smart doorbells, all of those devices that we are using to control aspects of our life electronically can be hacked into and used as part of a botnet, and were recently used in 2016 to attack a server that controlled many of the large players' websites on the internet. So this attack happened when I was in that conference with the person who I spoke of earlier, that was the internal auditor for the House of Representatives. She was getting a lot of messages that day, and she finally told us that she had to pause her meeting for a 10-minute break while she addressed a few of the issues that were going on. She later told us that they were concerned that this denial of service attack could actually be a terrorist attack, and so they were trying to figure out what was going on. So what happened was, finally what they've determined is millions of devices that are unsecured and connected to the internet. All of these smart devices, your webcams, your web videos, your thermostats, your refrigerators, all of these devices were hacked into and affected with some malware that allowed them to be utilized in this distributed denial of service attack. What they did was they sent thousands, trillions of data, bits of data, toward a significant server. The company was called Dyn, and they house websites for many of the big players. Any of the people that they housed the website for, it took down their website. So some of the companies that were affected were Twitter, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, PayPal, most of Visa, Airbnb, GitHub, as well as many users in Europe and the US. This group of hackers called the New World Hacker Group, and at the time that I created these slides and read about this hack, it was not verified that they did it, although they took credit for it. They created this network of botnet of zombie computers that was sending 1.2 trillion bits per second of data toward these Dyn managed servers. They did it only to test whether they could bring it down or not, and they did it only to expose security weaknesses in the systems. The red on this map show you all of the different areas that they took down. So at about 10 o'clock in the morning, they took down the servers on the East Coast, and it shut down most of those websites. So at that point, Dyn company started going after fixing the problem and trying to install devices that would filter through the requests for information and tried to determine which ones were legitimate and which ones were suspect, and then they would block the malicious ones. They were able to bring this back up probably 2 or 3 hours after it went down. As soon as they got these servers back up and running, the organization flipped their botnet and started sending the signals to their West Coast server, and then mid-afternoon took down the West Coast server, which they then had to fix that and put the security information in to block the illegitimate requests for information so that they could get these servers back up. All in all, this distributed denial of service attack that happened on October of 2016 took down most of these websites for approximately the entire day on that Friday. Now, if you can imagine Amazon, I believe we said that their loss per hour was in approximate $5 million. And they were down the entire business day in the US. So they may have gotten some business in other countries or in off hours when they were able to get the items back up and running. But the majority of the business day, they were down. We had no internet during that time period access to those sites. So if you can imagine at least 8 hours of lost revenue at $5 million an hour. That is a huge chunk of money that this denial of service attack cost Amazon. So I am imagining that Dyn had to do a lot of reassuring that they had beefed up their security within their servers to try to weed out anything like this that would happen in the future and prevent it. And the organization that did perpetrate it did give the warning in their press release that their announcement that they leaked to the press, or however they did it, that basically said, if you don't fix these internet weaknesses, we will attack again. So One thing I think as individuals that we can do is ensure that all of our systems are secured with passwords and that we don't have any devices that are unsecured attaching to the network, to the internet, because that makes those devices an easy target to become the zombies or the bots that are used in these attacks. Controls and restraints that we can impose on a user or a system. So controls are designed to help mitigate some of these risks. Okay, we can reduce damage. We can try to ensure that only people who should have access to our data have access. And so we should be looking at putting controls in place to reduce our risk that the damage will occur. So for example, we can look at program or data entry controls. We saw some of these in Excel when we were looking at validation rules, trying to ensure that the data that we put in our system is valid. We can use backups, we can use access controls, atomic transactions, and audit trails, and these are all things that we're going to talk about a little bit more. So a reliable application should include controls that will help resist poor data entry. We should have things that make sure that in a date field we can only enter dates and things of this nature. We want to make sure that in an amount field we can only enter numbers. We want to make sure that if the numbers should only be positive, that negative numbers are not allowed. All these kind of controls or rules can be built into the software to help make sure that users use it correctly. It's similar to those validation rules that we had in Excel. A good computer system should include these rules automatically in that program. Now, a backup is periodically duplicating your data. Obviously, there are other types of backups that we could do where we could back up programs or systems installations. And while those are good to have as well, the backup of your data is the most important because that is the hardest to recreate. We want to be able to duplicate all of the data that we have so that should something go wrong, we do not lose that information. Some systems have automated backup systems built into them so that it is automatically duplicating our data onto another device. An RAID system is one way that we can accomplish this, a redundant array of independent, inexpensive disks. They're inexpensive disks that are set so that we make 2 copies of the data. Every time we make changes to it, it writes in 2 different places. So we always have multiple copies of the entire drive of data in these RAID systems. If one of the drives or disks were to fail, we can simply swap them out and we still keep up and running, so we can mitigate downtime, but we can also prevent against data loss. We can also use some companies that provide backup services or backup facilities, and we can use those in the event of a disaster where our entire site is damaged or destroyed. One thing that we need to be concerned about with our backups is that we should be keeping at least one backup off-site, because if there's a fire or some other natural disaster and our building is destroyed, the data would be lost on the backups as well if they are all in that facility. I know some people say, but we use fireproof safes. But if you look at the fireproof safe carefully, you will see that they have a rating as to how hot it can get outside that safe before paper will burn that is inside it or magnetic media will melt. So if that fire is right outside that safe, it is likely going to reach a temperature that it would not be protected even within that safe. So a fireproof safe is not a replacement for off-site protection. However, a lot of companies are starting to use cloud storage or an online backup service to facilitate this off-site storage as well. Some of the things that we need to be considered when we're creating a backup plan, and this is something I think all individuals should have as well, because you should be protecting the data that you are storing on your computers, your laptops, your tablets, and your smartphones. Any of these devices that you're using that store digital data, it should be protected. So you have to consider how frequently are you going to back up. To make that decision, you need to look at what is the cost to recreate the data and what is the cost if that data is lost. And I note here that your cost may not be in dollars. I recall a student telling me one time as we were going through this that she had the pictures of her father on her phone, her and her father. And that was the only place she had them. If something happened to that phone, she would not ever be able to get those pictures back, nor would she be able to take new pictures because her father had recently passed away. So the cost to her of losing that data was huge. It was not a huge financial number, but it was a huge emotional number of never being able to get new ones. So we have to look at that cost. The higher the cost of replacing or losing that data, the more frequently we should consider backing it up. Putting our data backups on multiple media is also a good idea, because if one media fails, then you have another one that you can try to use. For example, periodically, hard drives, external drives can fail. If you have all of your data on an external drive and nowhere else, and that data fails, you have no other way to recover it. But if you have it on external drives and in cloud storage, and maybe you have it on a photography website that you upload to, so you've got your things stored in multiple places, should something happen, you can go to one of those other medias to try to recover your files. Off-site storage, again, is very important. Internet backups are often being used to provide that off-site storage because now it is stored on that company's website, or excuse me, that company's servers, which are not in the same facility as yours. And then another thing that sometimes makes backups easier and more, the reliance on them, they're being done is easier, is to make sure they are automatic. If I have to do something to start the backup, then I have to rely on remembering it. If it is automatically backed up for me, then I don't have to remember to do anything. So there are systems that you can set to automatically back up at the end of each day or maybe on the lunch hour. You can also set systems so that anytime you change a file, it flags it so that it will back it up again. There are things like this that you can do so that you can ensure that even if you forget, the backups are still happening. Access controls are measures taken to ensure that only those people who are authorized have access to the computer or the network, as well as getting into the applications or the data. A couple of ways that we can do this are with physical locks. We can also use software locks to determine who is authorized to access it. Physically locking the facility, remember in our example before, we cannot assume that that means there is no other way in to our network. All we can assume is that there's no other way to physically touch the computer if they can't get into that room. So we have to still take other precautions to ensure that if they do get into the network, that we keep them out of the applications and the data that we don't want them to be able to get to. When we're looking at access controls, not the physical locks on the doors, but when we look at what we can get into with companies, we need to be, with passwords and account numbers, we want to look at 3 different types of controls. What you know, what you have, and who you are. So the what you know are pieces of information that you would know that you can type in. They include user IDs and passwords. Oftentimes the user IDs are not a secret, but the passwords should be. And you have to know that information in order to get in. Now, the more of these things that you can combine, the less likely someone is to be able to get in that shouldn't. So if we combine that with something that I have to have, such as a special device or my smartphone with the Duo login system that we have on Canvas, now I have to know the password and have the Duo access device in order to get in. Both things are required. The third one is who you are. That's using some physical characteristic about the individual. We see thumbprint used to open up our phones, and we see face scans now to open up our phones. So those are being used more. This slide is talking about passwords and how quickly they can be hacked into. So according to a password management company, the 3 most common passwords used are the word password, or 1 2 3 4 5 6, or 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. So with those types of passwords, it's very easy for someone else to hack into our system. Now what this slide is showing us is 2 things, and this is not on the exam. Okay, but you have strong passwords containing both upper and lower, and digits and characters as well as letters. They recommend at least 15 characters long, not using dictionary words exactly the way as they're typed out, not writing down your password, changing them regularly, and if you have a sensitive account, such as a website for your bank or for your credit card, that you have a different high or strong password for each sensitive account. Now remember that not every website requires a strong password. If you are not storing credit card information or personal information on those websites, if you're just going there to look around, you do not need to have a strong password. We could also use password vault programs to generate and keep our passwords for us. So those are some ways that we can make them stronger, but let's take a look at how quickly they can crack passwords. Now, this data is a couple of years old, so I'm sure it's even faster than it is now. It's assuming some password cracking software that was, according to the article I read, average password cracking software at the time, and this is probably 3 years ago. So if you had, the L stands for the length of the password, how many characters are in it. The C stands for the complexity. If it is a C1, it's all lowercase. A C2 is lower and uppercase letters. C3 adds numbers. And C4 uses lowercase, uppercase numbers and symbols such as the @ sign or the exclamation. If you have a 4-character password that is all lowercase, password cracking software can crack that in less than 1 second. Now, you could say, yeah, well, my bank, I use a 7-character password that is a complexity of 4. It has all of those items in it, upper, lower, numbers, and symbols. A good password cracking program could crack your password in 6 weeks. So to me, that means I have to change my password every 6 weeks, or I risk the fact that somebody could crack into it. But if you just made it 3 extra digits and kept that level 4, now you're up to 91,000 years before that same software could crack the password that they got in 6 weeks when it was 3 digits less. So if you went all the way up to the 15 characters long and made it a 4, it would be even greater than that. So you can see why organizations are lengthening the passwords that they require us to use. As individuals, we should make sure that we are using strong passwords wherever we are storing sensitive information to help prevent identity theft. We can also use biometrics. We talked a little bit about adding the security code to the access passwords, making it like Duo. We can also add a biometric using a physical characteristic about ourselves, such as a voice command to start Siri, or a thumbprint to open up our phone. Now many phones have face scans. It's interesting to note that up to 50% of the help desk calls are typically from people who have forgotten their passwords. So using a thumbprint or fingerprint can help eliminate these types of calls. But it does also have risks. Again, in that same security conference, the individual that we spoke with said she was not allowed to store her thumbprint in her phone or her face scan in her phone. And if she did, it was a fireable offense. And once you got to a certain security clearance within the government, you were not allowed to store digital representations of your fingerprints, thumbprints, or face scans or anything like that to open up your devices. Their logic was If you have passwords and you require a security card and somehow that system gets breached, we can give you a new password, we can give you a new security card. But if someone breaks in and steals your fingerprints or steals your thumbprints from the digital storage device that is maintaining those to open your devices, we cannot give you new thumbs or new faces to change that security setting. So they won't allow them to use those. So biometrics does have its risks, even though it does serve a purpose as well. Atomic transactions are a set of transactions that all have to post at once. So if I use an atomic transaction, if all of the transactions do not execute completely, then they are all reversed out and none of them are allowed to post. So it's a control against a malfunction, as well as it can try to prevent fraud by posting partial activities. So this gives you an example of how an atomic transaction would work. If I create a sale, if it doesn't update the invoice, the shipping, the commission, and the accounts receivable all at once, then it will not update any of them. The audit trail is keeping a set of documentation facts that help us detect who recorded the transactions, when they were recorded, and who approved them, as well as the detail of the transactions. Accountants have used audit trails for a long time in being able to track where my numbers come from. If I say I have accounts receivable of a certain dollar amount, I need to be able to prove all of the transactions that went into that account to create that balance. This is also talking about tracking who and when the transactions were being processed, which can help us identify fraudulent transactions, and it can help us make sure that everything is authorized. We don't have transactions being posted when no one is at work, which would indicate that someone is in the system remotely doing things that potentially they shouldn't be. So the audit trail is sometimes automatically created using data such as date and time of the transactions, the name or password of the user updating the file, sometimes even the device on which the transactions were being processed. So this allows us to track both fraud and abuse within our systems. It also is a requirement now of Sarbanes-Oxley that companies need to implement audit trails and other measures in their systems. Data breaches can be a very expensive event for a company. This institute did a survey of 850 executives, saying that the average time to restore a company's reputation after a data breach is 1 year. So not only do you have to rebuild your reputation, but you have brand value that could also be lost because of people perceive now a risk of doing business with you, that their data could become suspect to breach. %43 of those people who had a data breach had not implemented a response plan in advance of that breach. So what they recommend is that companies plan an outline for what steps they should take after a breach happens. They take steps to protect themselves from a breach, and that they party with a third-party professional to get help if they need to. Data breaches can affect any organization. We hear about them all the time. We hear about Target, for example, had a large data breach a few years ago. Oftentimes, these breaches are a result, again, of human error, employee mistakes, and we as the users let the criminals in. I read some information about the Target breach, and they apparently have traced it back to a network support person came in to do some network installations, updating software, fixing a problem on the network. They issued that support person a temporary password that would give him access to virtually anything on the network because he needed that broad, pervasive access to fix the problem. Now, once he got the problem fixed, the task was for the individual to remove that password from the system so that that no longer had access to anything in the system. The network person was there late. The problem was harder to fix than they thought. It took him longer than he thought, so he had to work late. The individual who was supposed to delete the password also had to stay late, waiting with this network person so that they would not be at their company alone. So they were supervised. Well, the person figured he would remove it the next day. He wanted to get home to his family, so he did not remove the password when he left. The next day he forgot. Someone who hacked in utilized that temporary password that should have been deleted, and that is how they were able to gain access to the data for the data breach. Obviously, we see a lot about the retail companies that are large targets for data breaches, but surprisingly, small CPA firms are even a big target, and small law firms. Now, you might think, why would a CPA firm be the target for a data breach? Small CPA firms do a lot of tax returns. Therefore, they have a lot of businesses and individuals' information, such as social security numbers, addresses, etc., stored in their systems. They target the small firms rather than the large ones because their assumption is the larger firms have more security in place to protect themselves. So as you can see, no company, small or large, is exempt from the risks that we have of a data breach. So you must protect yourself so that your company doesn't fall victim to that. Security measures that we can take, we have firewalls. This is the best way to protect us against the internet intrusions. We also have authentication, encryption, digital signatures, and digital certificates. Okay, so a firewall consists of both hardware and software that block access to computer resources. It is the best defense of keeping people out of your network over the internet. It is routinely integrated into routers, and it utilizes technology to keep those users from getting in that should not be. It blocks the attempts. It screens the activities of a person who logs into the internet, and it also can allow retrieval and viewing of certain material while blocking other information from being accessed as well. While firewalls are used to keep unauthorized users out, they can also be used to restrict unauthorized software or instructions from coming in, such as viruses or other malware. So when employees use a company computer to access external websites, the firewall can be screening for malware and viruses to try to prevent those as well. We can also set it up to block employee access to certain sites that we know are suspect to launching rogue programs or malware. There's also a technique called the demilitarized zone approach. This can be used to increase security. The DMZ is a network of computers that are connected to the company's trusted network, such as the intranet. And then they are also connected to the untrusted network, which is the public internet at the other end. The DMZ includes resources to which the organization allows direct access from the internet, and it may include a website and computers from which people can download files. But it provides a barrier between the company's intranet and the public internet. A proxy server represents another server for all information requests from resources inside a trusted network. It can also be placed between the internet and the organization's intranet when there is no demilitarized zone. Authentication is the process of ensuring that you are who you say you are. So I'm trying to make sure that when someone logs into my system and they say they're me, that it really is me. Encryption means I'm coding a message into an unreadable form so that if someone intercepts that message during the transmission between networks, that they cannot read it and interpret what it says. If you are going to be emailing sensitive information, such as social security numbers or credit card information, or you're going to be putting it in a website to pay for your product you're purchasing, you need to ensure that the messages are being encrypted so that there is security in place to make sure it stays confidential. If you're using a website, you want to look for HTTPS as part of the website name. So an encryption program takes plain text and scrambles it into something that is unreadable. That is called ciphertext. The ciphertext is created using some sort of a mathematical algorithm and a key. And we are constantly seeing new mathematical algorithms being created and enhanced to make the encryptions harder to decipher if they get that ciphertext and want to try to unscramble it. There are two ways to do public key encryption using a public key or a private key. But either way, there has to be some way for the ciphertext to be unscrambled at the receiving end, and so that the recipient can actually read the information. HTTPS is the secure way of transmitting on an internet web page. You need to make sure if you're going to be sending something in an email that you either encrypt the email, or if you can't encrypt the email, you can encrypt the documents that are attached to the email so that they can't be opened. So I've seen it done both ways. So this shows you we start out with the plain text. We encrypt it. It becomes ciphertext. We decrypt it, and it becomes the original message again at the recipient end. And this is talking about how the different keys are working. Okay, so we've got a public key, we've got private keys, and this is trying to explain some of those to you. Okay, a digital signature is a way to authenticate online messages. So you want to think of it as a physical signature. And what the digital signature does is it authenticates the identity and guarantees that no one has changed the file. So if I put a digital signature on a file, then if someone alters that, my digital signature will be removed. A digital certificate is a computer file that serves as the equivalent of ID cards, and it associates one's identity with a public key. The certificate authority is the trusted third party that is issuing the digital certificates. So if you're handling a lot of secure information that needs to be transmitted securely, you'd want to start using these digital certificates and digital issued by these certificate authorities to ensure that no one had changed the information after you sent it and that it came from the right person. Now there are a lot of downsides to security as well. So it's a fine line figuring out how do I enhance security without stifling productivity. Okay, for example, users are very much complaining about the fact that they have multiple systems they have to sign into to get their work done, and oftentimes they have to have a separate password and login for every system. So that A means I have a lot of time spent logging in, but B, I also have to remember a lot of different sign-ins. And so in order to help with that, you could use a single sign-on system. With a single sign-on system, users are required to identify themselves only once before accessing several different systems, which are all linked on your network. So they log in once to the network, and that automatically logs them into the other applications that are on the network, thereby keeping the login time down as well as having to remember multiple passwords. Encryption also slows the processing down because every time you have to scramble the message and unscramble the message, that's all taking time. And so that does slow down your communication. So you probably don't want to encrypt everything. The example that they showed in one of the charts was the meeting time is going to be 10 a.m. I probably would not be sending that as a encrypted message, simply because I don't need to worry about if that is intercepted by someone else. But if I were sending something that maybe had social security numbers in it, I would definitely be encrypting that to ensure that nobody could get a hold of that information. So when it comes to determining how much security we need, IT specialists have to make sure that they are explaining both the upside and the downside of these security measures so they can find the right balance. The Patriot Act the Patriot Act was passed into law to give law enforcement agencies surveillance and wiretapping rights that they did not have before 2001. So the law permits the FBI to read private files and private internet records without informing the suspected client, and without the need for the law enforcement agency to present to the court a probable cause. So a lot of times in the past they were allowed to do some phone tapping, but now they've written the laws in a way that also covers emails as well as digital communications. Security measures may reduce mishaps, but remember, we cannot control all disasters. Just like we're seeing in today's world, we have a lot of security measures in place, but we still have this pandemic that has shut down a lot of businesses, caused us to start doing business a different way, caused us to teach the classes online instead of in person. And we have to be prepared to recover and keep going when those unplanned things happen. Redundancy in systems can be used to try to protect against this. By redundancies, we mean, for example, using multiple computer drives so that if one drive goes down, we can immediately start working on another. Redundancy can be very expensive, but it can also be very effective. So it depends on the criticalness of the system that you're working with. Business recovery plans are a detailed plan of what should be done and by whom if a critical system goes down. It's also called disaster recovery planning, business resumption planning, and business continuity planning. And I think it's important to mention here that it's not just supposed to look at keeping your computer systems up and running. It's supposed to look at getting your business up and running. How can you get back in business as quickly as possible so that you can stay working and productive even during a crisis? Just like we had part of our continuity plan was to be able to teach through these Zoom classes, that is one of the things that as an entity, IU had put in place. CIOs often have the tasks of earmarking funds for this disaster recovery planning, and sometimes that can be very difficult to justify because it's hard to show the return of investment on that process. However, you want to remember that while it's hard to show the benefit of getting up and running quicker, it can be very costly to a company if they cannot. I remember reading some articles about some companies after one of the hurricanes came in. I believe it was the one in maybe Louisiana. I'm not 100% sure which hurricane it was. But they talked about several companies that did not have these continuity plans in place, and it took them weeks or months to get back up and running, and many of them almost had to start over because they lost a lot of business because they could not meet the needs of their customers. One company had a very good plan that I'd read about, and this company not only knew exactly who was going to do what, but they had practiced it. So when this happened and their facility was destroyed, they had contracts with other suppliers, other companies that they could use part of their manufacturing facility to get their manufacturing process up and running. They had all sorts of things in place, not only to get the computers up and running, but to get the people back working and the business itself up and running again. And they were up and running in less than 24 hours and able to meet the needs of their customers within weeks instead of months. They still had a slight delay because they didn't have as much inventory anymore, but they even had arrangements with inventory providers to get the raw materials they needed shipped almost immediately, and they did have a small amount of inventory stashed in a satellite warehouse that had not been affected so that they could use that to meet the demand of some of the urgent customer needs. So these can be very important plans. Mission critical applications are those that the business cannot conduct business without, and they should be given the highest priority. So we should prioritize our applications, and the ones that are the most important are mission critical, and they are the ones that you're going to focus on getting up and running first. Hot sites can be alternate sites that the business can use when a disaster occurs, and they're referring to them a lot here as the for backups or for computer systems, but we could also contract with companies that provide sites for manufacturing and other things. The cost of damage is the aggregate of all the potential damages multiplied by the probability that that will happen, and experts are usually employed to estimate that cost. The more expensive the preventive measures, then we need to make sure that those costs are being covered. The cost of security measures go up, and the cost of the potential damage goes down. Ideally, we would want to place ourselves at the intersection of those two lines. So we have several things that we can do as we're creating a developed business recovery plan. You can see there are several steps to it. We cannot forget to test the plan. If all we do is create the plan and we do not ensure that our employees and our vendors know exactly what is going to happen in the heat of the moment when the disaster has occurred, that is not the time when you want your employees to try to figure out what these things mean. So we need to test the plan and make sure that it's going to work. Security measures should be regarded as a form of insurance. We are trying to ensure that the problems don't happen. You have to remember that you cannot prevent all problems from occurring with your computer systems. I have had over the years at least 3 to 4 computers where the hard drive fails. Nothing I can do about that. However, with each failure, I learn lessons to improve the security, many times at very little cost, but yet I improve things enough so that the next time there is a problem, then my risk or my exposure of what can be lost is less. So to determine how much security is enough, experts can be employed to help you estimate the cost and the probabilities of the damages that will occur if those security measures are not in place. And then also you want to estimate the cost of the security measures themselves. We want to make sure that our security measure cost does not exceed the value of what we are protecting. So they need to be focused on protecting the information. That is where most of the value is, not on the applications or the hardware necessarily, which could easily be replaced. And this shows you an example of charting exactly how we would determine how much our spending on security would be. It's important to remember that we've got a lot of information that has value, but if you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on security, it could be slowing down the processing, which is costing you money. And if the data could be replaced for, let's say, throw a number out there of $1,000, but I'm spending $5,000 to protect it, that doesn't make sense. Okay, so you need to take into account what is the value of the asset you are protecting. So when we look at how to calculate downtime, we want to consider how can we minimize the amount of time our systems are down. If they are mission critical systems and we cannot risk them being down, then we often need to add a duplicate or an alternate power source in case our power is lost. So you would add a generator or things of that. If they're highly interdependent systems that are integrated with a lot of other ones, then that redundancy can cause one system that may not appear to be mission critical to become mission critical. So we have to take into account the expectations of the interdependent systems as well. The rest of the slides in this PowerPoint that you see are for your personal knowledge. If you're interested in this topic and you want to pursue more information, this just gives you a few things to think about, areas that you could protect and security measures you could use. Talks about different ways of protecting, such as a data backup plan, making sure perhaps if you are using your computer in a setting where you could potentially drop it a lot, getting these ruggedized devices, things of that nature. So this is not for the exam. These are all for your own knowledge, ways that you could protect yourself or a company could protect its computer assets. And so there's a lot of information on these slides that you could use. Here's a link of ways that is recommended to protect your smartphones. Remember that your smartphones are a computer and they are at risk from hackers, virus writers, and other cyber criminals, the same as any other computer would be. And then also I give you this Microsoft Security Center if you are interested in more information on security. You can see that the security chapter is one of my favorites, so I hope this information is useful. Remember that the information on the end, as well as the information about the password cracking statistics and how long that takes, that information is not for your exam, it's for your personal knowledge.